Welcome to U.S. Visa Questions Answered Here.
Hello and welcome to Talking U.S. Visas with immigration attorney Frances Hayden. For the past 35 years, Frances has focused on consular processing of non-immigrant visas at U.S. embassies and consulates worldwide, with a special emphasis on third country national visa processing. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is all about navigating visitor visas to avoid denials and pitfalls. Frances, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So can you kind of explain just what a visitor visa is and what it's used for?
Yes, visitor visas are probably the most commonly issued visas by the U.S. government. And it's basically to allow somebody to come on a temporary basis to the United States, not engage in employment while they're here, and go back to their home country afterwards.
Seems simple.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But it's not. And it's actually one of those things that it's probably one of the hardest visas to get.
Really?
And the main reason for that is that it has this very subjective factor to it that the consular officer has to be convinced that you're planning to return to your home country and that you have strong enough ties there. And that's a very amorphous concept.
How long can someone stay on a visitor visa?
It depends on the purpose of their travel. There are two different kinds of visitor visas. There's the B2, which is tourism, and the B1, which is business. Within those two categories, there's a lot of diversity as to the purpose of your trip. Generally speaking, a tourist visa, when you enter, they will give you a default of a 6-month stay, which is very long. Most people.
That is long. That's longer than I was expecting you to say.
Isn't that long? There's a trick to that. I'll get back to it. But the B1, the default might usually be 3 months. It's for business purposes, but they tend to ask you, how long are you going to stay? When is your return ticket? What are you here for? If you say, well, I'm just here to go to the Oscars, then they're only going to give you maybe as long as that takes, maybe a couple of weeks. So with the business visitor visa, they often limit it even further. But the trick about coming in and staying the full 6 months is that although it's legal, they'll hold it against you. They'll hold it against you the next time you come back in. Especially if your turnaround time outside the country is short, like a month or a few months, that's considered short. And they'll say, well, wait a minute, you're spending most of the year here. What's going on? Are you living here? Are you working here? Are you planning to stay? And the other time it bites you is when you go to renew the visa in your passport and they look at your travel history. And if they say that you repeatedly stayed in the United States for 6 months at a time, they're going to question you a lot about that. And there's often not a great answer, because if you're doing that multiple times, it really does create a presumption that you are doing something wrong, violating the visa in some way, even though it's perfectly legal. And when I said presumption, it reminded me of a very important factor with the visitor visa, and why I say it's one of the most difficult ones to get, is there is literally a presumption in the law that you are coming. When you apply for the visa, the presumption is you're planning to stay in the United States, and you have to disprove the presumption, and the burden is on you.
Oh, wow.
So it's hard to prove a negative, right?
Yeah.
But we can go into a little more what the factors are that they look at. But it's an area where people often do it themselves, the application. And I used to think for a long time, I thought, well, you don't really need an attorney for this because there's no complicated legal issue here. But I have completely changed my mind about that. And I really believe that it's good to have an attorney involved to prepare you. And I believe that I have really succeeded in helping people get the visa when they wouldn't have otherwise, because of the mistakes that people often make.
Were there any specific reasons that you can point to as to why you kind of changed your opinion on whether someone would need an attorney or not?
Well, I started to notice when people called me after they got denied what they did wrong. And I realized if they had talked to me first, they would have done it differently and they would have been approved. And most of the times it has to do with presenting things backward. Like, they're not necessarily telling any lies, but there are so many rumors in this area, and there are a lot of non-attorneys giving advice in many countries in this area. And they tell them to say, well, don't tell them that you your uncle lives there, or don't tell them that you have a sister living in the United States. Don't tell them that you, or to some extent, it amounts to fraud, where they will submit saying that they're married to somebody in the home country and they're not. Or those are the really extreme cases. It happens all the time, but those are really bad. But most of the time, the biggest mistake people make is that they present the case as if there's somebody in the United States who's going to take care of everything they need. They give them a place to stay. They're paying for their airline ticket. This person has a good job. They have money in the bank. The problem with that is obvious, right? It shows that you're more likely to stay in the U.S. than come back. Because if you have that kind of free ride in the U.S., why would you come home?
What's your motivation to leave? Yeah.
Exactly. So, people even present detailed letters of support and all that. And I say, no, you have to prove that you have the money to pay for your trip. And it's okay to stay with relatives, but don't submit all their documentation. Submit your documentation, talking about the reasons why you will return, talking about your job, your business, your school, whatever it is that ties you to your home country, to disprove the presumption that you're going to stay.
So would you consider these hard to get?
Well, that might be going too far. They're probably, I don't know if this is statistically true, but my impression is that they're the most frequently applied for visa. And so therefore, they're probably the most frequently denied.
Gotcha. It makes sense that would be the most applied for.
Yes. And many of them are approved. So, but I think sometimes people are shocked when they're denied because they think it should be simple.
I think it was a slam dunk. Yeah.
Many times people are very surprised when they don't get it. Another mistake they make is many times people will go in with a very vague plan. And the vague plan tends to make it look like you're not going to come back. Like you say, well, I just want to visit the US and, I don't really
see what's going on here. Yeah.
Exactly. I want to check it out. And they don't know when they're going and they don't know when they're coming back, that kind of thing. No, it's much better to have a very specific plan with a beginning, middle, and end. It's like telling a story. You have to tell the whole story, which results in you being back in your home country.
That's the ending.
Yes, that's the ending. And then you get to visit again later, but don't stay too long.
Just like house guests.
Oh, very much so.
Can you talk about what the ESTA program is?
Yes. We usually call that ESTA.
Oh, that makes sense. It's a lot easier than what I said.
No, that's okay. There are many countries around the world where their citizens don't need a visa to enter the United States. And those countries can change. But generally, it's determined by the visitor visa applications having a very low refusal rate. So if only 1 or 2% of the people coming from that country have their visas denied, the U.S. government decides to let them come without a visa. And if they can also get a visa if they want to stay longer, because the ESTA entry can only be for 3 months, not 6, and there are no extensions. There are also no, with the other type, you can extend if you have a good reason to extend. But with the ESTA, 3 months, no extensions and no changes. So if you come in and you look around, you check it out, and you decide, oh, I like this school. I want to go to this school. And so you want to change to be a student visa holder. You can't do that on ESTA. You have to go to your home country and get a visa and come back. So no changes, no extensions, 3 months only. I guess that's the way for them to control it, for the government to control your stay. It also, the ESTA program greatly reduces the burden on the consulates and embassies because they don't have to adjudicate any visas. You sign up for ESTA online and answer some questions. If you don't get ESTA because you have to do some screening questions, then you do have to go apply for a B1 or a B2 visa.
It seems like if that's a little bit easier, is that just, should most people start there?
Yes, most people who have the nationality of a country that participates in the ESTA program do start there.
Okay.
But they will be not granted ESTA if they answer certain questions like having been arrested, having overstayed their visa previously, having been refused a visa in the past, and various other things. So there are certain things that trigger ESTA to be denied. And when ESTA is denied, the person needs to go attend a consular interview and have sort of a deeper screening about their eligibility.
Are there similar rules as far as kind of what we were talking about before about like, oh, hey, you were only gone for a month and then all of a sudden you're back? I mean, is it kind of like that? Can you not really just keep applying to use the ESTA program?
No, the ESTA, when you're getting screened for ESTA and you're issued the ESTA, it lasts for an extended period of time before you have to re-register. Certain things trigger re-registering, like you've been arrested or you've been refused a visa.
Yeah.
You're supposed to re-register. And then if the inspection officer sees that you didn't reveal that on your ESTA, you might lose your ESTA. You can lose your ESTA. So yes, definitely, if you're going in on ESTA and you're staying for the full 90 days, departing, coming back very quickly, the time it will be triggered is when you're entering and you're talking to the immigration inspectors, and that agency is known as Customs and Border Protection. And they're going to see from your travel history, well, weren't you just here? Why did you stay for 90 days? Why did you come back and stay for 60 days? And there are individuals who, if you look at their travel history, they've been coming in and out of ESTA for the whole year. And most of the time they're in the US. And so at that time, a person is taken into what we call secondary inspection and questioned further. And I do want to do a whole discussion with you one day on that.
Okay.
And what happens when you are sent to secondary inspection and what to be aware of. And a lot of the time, if they do discover that this person has been sort of abusing the ESTA privilege, they will give them a piece of paper that says you're no longer eligible to use ESTA and you have to go apply for a visa. And they put you back on a plane, send you back.
Wow.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Is it fair to say that it would be tougher to get the visa if that happened to you?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like it would be.
It's a factor for sure. You have some explaining to do. And it depends on why, the ESTA was refused. If it was refused because you admitted that you were engaging in unauthorized employment, that's serious. It also has to do with what kind of visa you're applying for. If you go in to apply for the visitor visa, the B1 or B2, and you've abused the ESTA, you're less likely to get the visitor visa because you've already proven that you have the intention to stay a long time and perhaps not return to your home country. So those situations can be quite problematic, and there are some solutions, and I do consult with people in this situation and give them what their other options are. For example, if you apply for a different kind of visa that doesn't require that you prove you have a residence in your home country that you're going to return to, there are some visas like that. So if you can switch over to something like that, then you're more likely to be approved because you don't have to disprove the presumption you're planning to live in the United States. I hope I'm not giving you too much information.
No, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the mistakes and pitfalls people have, but as a general rule, when someone wants a visitor visa, what are your tips? What are your what is your go-to advice to people to, really make sure you do this if you want to try to for a better chance at being granted?
Well, there are plenty. One of them is, if you don't appear to be eligible, like if you talk to me and I say, your chances aren't that great because you haven't held a job, say, for a period of about a year, meaning you need to have had a steady job for a year for them to think you're going to come back to it. If you just started your job recently, then they think that's not stable enough for us. Again, if you have a complicated travel history, you need to be prepared to how to explain it. It helps if you have traveled to other countries. If you have traveled internationally, it's one of the things they look to. Oh, he went to France, he went to Japan, he went to Canada, and he came back, and he's still working.
He always came back.
He came back, and he had a chance to live in Paris, and he didn't do it. So I'm pretty sure he's not going to stay. The major tip, which I already mentioned, is this thing about instead of showing your own ability to pay for your trip, you're showing the ability of somebody else to take care of when you get there. That's the main mistake people make.
Yeah, they think they're doing good, but
they think they're doing what they were instructed to do.
Right.
Because they're showing that they're not going to go drive Uber and they're not going to go work in a restaurant or something like that. The other is, there's a tremendous amount of fraud in this area. So being very straightforward is highly recommended. And even sometimes if you think it's something against your interests, like, well, my father lives there and I want to go visit him. Well, what's your father's status? You have to, if you answer a question either on the electronic visa application form or at the interview that is somewhat against your own interest, and it's true, it shows your credibility because you're not just giving them a script that somebody taught you. You have to be authentic. It's extremely important to be honest and authentic. It's extremely important to be very clear on why you want to go and to be clear on why you want to come back. Those are the major factors.
What does it mean to be refused the visa under 214B?
Yeah, that's probably the most common type of refusal for any kind of visa. It can happen with any visa, but it's extremely common with visitor visas. And in that context, it really does usually mean that you haven't overcome the presumption in the law that you're going to stay or violate the visitor visa status. The law also, in 214B, the section of the law that they refuse you under, also is about generally being ineligible. But in the B1, B2, or visitor visa context, it's almost always that you didn't overcome the presumption that you were going to stay, or the consular officer just didn't believe your story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They didn't believe that you're really going to do what you say you're going to do. And this is the subjectivity. It's a person-to-person dialogue, with, as we talked about before, body language, your smile, your credibility is so very important. And so they end up feeling either just plain uncomfortable about the situation and not thinking that you're telling the truth about your plans, or just clearly feeling that why would you go back? And a lot of that depends on country conditions. So if you're coming from particular countries where people are fleeing for various reasons,
where things are bad,
very hard to get a visitor visa, very hard. And you will be denied 214B.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The nice thing about 214B, though I have to be positive, is that it's not a permanent bar. And they always tell you, you're welcome to apply again. Although the guideline, and people often ask me, well, I was denied, when can I apply again? And you can apply tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But normally they want to see some changed circumstance.
Yeah, why did they deny you, and how can you make that right?
That's exactly it. They ask, why did they deny? What happened? What happened the last time? And sometimes people don't really know what happened. It's like, and I tell people, it's okay to say, I don't know. But I also try to advise them to find a way to present something new or changed, because that's what the consular officer wants to see. But there's a certain thing about being denied once that creates a momentum for further denials, unfortunately. Yeah. And that's particularly true in the visitor visa context, because the consular officer sees on their computer the record, and particularly the notes of their colleague that just denied you. So they know exactly what happened at the last interview, and you have to keep that in mind. And you have to say, well, there was a misunderstanding. I mean, this is where I drill down and talk to the people about everything and find out, well, what went wrong exactly. And usually I have an educated guess, because the denial is extremely vague. And that's what people hate. 214B could not be more vague. It's just, I'm sorry, you didn't qualify. And people don't know why. And so they often call me, why? Why did they deny me? And often they say they didn't look at my documents. And so if you can figure out what went wrong and figure out that really there may have been a misunderstanding, it's best, because each time you get denied, the momentum increases. It's like a snowball.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it's an awful cycle to get caught in. So that's another reason I decided that you really should consult an attorney, because you want to avoid that first denial more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure sounds like it. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Talking U.S. Visas with immigration attorney Frances Hayden. To connect with Frances and her team, visit haydenlaw.com. And please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Frances, always great to hear from you. Thanks so much for chatting with me.
Same here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.